But yeah, well, I like your point of view too. Speaking of that, and I appreciate the way you approach the whole just covering pro wrestling, and it's sort of the way I try to do it. Now you're much more comedic and stand up, and because you do stand up, and I wanted to ask you about that because I'm a huge stand up fan personally. I try to be very funny. I'm very up on the shits, old school. Raw and Delirious are two of the greatest, back-to-back things ever, pieces of media ever made. Yes. And then you fast forward today and there's shows I like to enjoy like every day, like Kill Tony and things like that. So what made you start doing stand-up? Like when and why?
It's funny because I was writing for Bleacher Report a few years ago, actually. And so they started to go digital and do web series.
Right.
And they wanted me to do a web show about wrestling. And the idea that I thought up is it's going to be like Weekend Update, but for wrestling. So I'll have like these headlines that are from the dirt sheets or whatever, but then I'll come up with a funny twist. That's what the show ended up being. But at first, it was like me just ranting about these wrestling storylines and these wrestling headlines. And I would watch it back like, this isn't funny at all. Like, it's just me ranting. I'm not being funny. I need to like tell jokes and stuff like that. But I didn't know how to tell a joke. Like I didn't know how to tell a joke like on command and be able to effectively write a joke. So the first couple of episodes in, I just didn't like it. I personally didn't like it, but they were getting great views and they're like, hey, we're going to keep this going. And so I decided that in order for me to not embarrass myself, at least for me, I was going to learn how to at least write a joke. So I got a book. It was like I'm staring at it right now. It was like the Idiot's Guide to Writing a Joke or something like that. And then there was a yellow book that I got about writing a joke. So I read and I realized that there's an actual process to writing jokes. There's like setup, punchline, rule of threes. There's different types of puns and malaprops or whatever. And I just immediately became obsessed with writing jokes, just knowing that there is a technical aspect to it. So what I would do is I would just get up in the morning and I would just practice by writing like topical headlines based on the news. I would go to Google Science and then Google Sports and Google Politics, whatever. And I would just write like 3 to 4 funny, what I thought were funny, pretty funny, whatever, jokes about what was going on. And it got me to start getting into writing like wrestling jokes. And so that's how I just kind of took to joke writing. And after the show ended, after a year or two, which was a very fun show, WWE WTF, but it ended. And then I kept deciding to just keep writing jokes. Like I had already gotten in a routine that every morning I get up in the morning and write jokes. So I did that. And then the jokes turned in from topical to writing about myself and what happened to me that day. And then I decided, wow, I should try stand-up. And then, the rest is history. I went to the Comedy Store open mic on a Sunday. I bombed. First time ever doing comedy. Bombed horribly. And the thing is, like, most people do well on their first time because it's like, the art of comedy is making it sound like it's coming out for the first time. So when you're doing comedy for the first time, it is coming out for the first time. So it kind of helps. So most people, at least most of my comedian friends, say they did well on their first time and then bombed a bunch. But me, I completely shit the bed the first time I did stand up. But like the masochist in me, and this is how I knew I was a comedian, is that like I bombed, but I was like, wow, like I'm going to try that again. Like I just bombed like a real comedian. I'll be back, I'll be back tomorrow.
It's like a sickness, dude.
Like most people, like if you fall out of a plane, you break every bone. You're like, I'm never getting into a plane again. I'm never jumping out of a plane. But a comedian will be in the hospital in a body cast. Like, man, when my bones heal up, I'm getting back on that goddamn plane.
Yeah. It's like how Dave Chappelle explains it. It sort of applies to all artistry. I'd say there's like a void in a comedian's soul though. And it can only be filled by like the sickness of having to like go up there and eat shit and then lick your wounds and come back and try it again. It's like, I don't know. It's what makes people great. And you're absolutely great at what you do. Do you ever mix in, like, do you do like pro wrestling bits as far as like in your stand-up? Do you try and mix in like topical
100%.
Like punchlines to do with like, oh, Kane, whatever,
And this might be a little bit of a scoop or whatnot, but I don't think I've ever talked about this before. Like my kind of long-term plan, like I'm definitely going to put a stand-up special on my YouTube channel and whatnot as I continue to grow my following and, sell it to somebody, hopefully. But I think the move is, at least the first time I try this, it's going to be all wrestling jokes. Because over the years, I've compiled at least 30 minutes of wrestling jokes that just based on like, when I'd watch wrestling, my parents wouldn't let me watch it. So I would watch at my parents' house. Then I would change the channel. So they always catch me watching I Love Lucy. So they thought I was this huge I Love Lucy fan. So there's jokes like that. But I've got a ton of jokes about wrestling. And I want to do a stand-up special, all wrestling jokes, and on, because that will appeal to my audience. If I just do stand-up for the sake of stand-up, it's probably not going to hook as many of my core audience as possible. So I want to just start with doing stand-up about wrestling and then kind of move from there. But yeah, I definitely have a bunch of jokes about wrestling in my stand-up.
That's a great idea, and it's very unique because nobody's really done that, I don't think. So that's a great idea. And so when let's say you bring like a wrestling joke to just like a cold audience, you don't know who's going to be there, let's say, do they receive it typically well, or are those the ones where you're kind of like, oh, it's hit or miss, and then...
Oh, the great thing about wrestling is it's a lot of fun to explain to people who don't watch wrestling. Like if they watch wrestling, that's a little bit of a bonus, but it's even more fun if they don't watch wrestling and you're like, one of my jokes is just me explaining The Godfather. Like it doesn't even need a punchline, but I punched it up and whatnot. But the first time I would do that joke, it was just me explaining The Godfather's entrance. And people were like dying because they've never seen this before, but I'm describing this pimp who would like go into the back and he'd come out magically with 4 more hoes. He's like Houdini, and he'd come out and I'm just like describing that, like kids are in the crowd and they're singing along to like, we pimp these hoes, what I'm saying? Man. The hoe train and stuff. So like me describing wrestling angles to people who don't watch wrestling is just as fun. And then if I do kind of go in depth about a wrestling angle, I'll usually pick like wrestlers who everybody knows. Like you guys know Randy Savage, right? You guys know Stone Cold. But a lot of my wrestling jokes are things that people could relate to, because like one of them, like the one I just talked about me not being allowed to watch wrestling, everybody could relate to that. There's always a show to kids growing up that they couldn't watch until they like snuck around to watch it. And for some people that's porn, So like I try to make it to where either it's relatable to a crowd in terms of my experience. Yeah, it has to do with wrestling, but it's either relatable in terms of the experience I had with wrestling, or it's about a wrestler who's so famous like The Rock or Stone Cold or Hulk Hogan that like everybody's going to know.
Exactly. Yeah. No, that's I've always found that fascinating. And so like, who were your comedic inspirations, let's say? So you actually have like a very cool way of how you just described that you even got into stand-up. I think a lot of people are like, oh, you're funny, you should go try this, is usually like the typical story. You were like, oh, I gotta try this sort of to get funnier, and then you sort of fell in love with it. And but like growing up, you weren't allowed to watch wrestling, but were you allowed to watch comedy, or was there anybody that now when you look back you're like, yeah, they really influenced me?
Absolutely. Well, my family loved Chris Rock, and he's my favorite comedian. We would, whenever we'd have long trips, we just put Chris Rock in the car, and I love Rock. Pretty much all of his specials memorized, but it never gets old because he's so funny. Yeah. So Chris Rock, Eddie, you mentioned Eddie Murphy, loved Eddie Murphy. Louis C.K. is actually the guy who influenced me, now that I look back on it, to do stand-up. I love Louis C.K. The thing about Louis, I would watch the show Louis, and like whenever I would watch stand-up before that, it's like they're on this big stage and there's all this pyrotechnics going on for their special, and it's like they're these larger than life superstars. So I just looked at it stand up like, wow, like I could never do that. I wouldn't put myself in the same category. But when I would see Louis C.K. do stand up on his TV show, which is one of the greatest TV shows ever, he presented it in a way that it was like he was working out material. It was like the opposite of Seinfeld, which I like Seinfeld, but if you watch the Jerry Seinfeld show, like it's just him doing stand up, but it's so produced and it looks fake. It doesn't look like he's even in a real comedy club. Louis C.K. is legitimately in the Comedy Cellar, like working out material. And just something about watching that felt so raw. And I was just like, man, like that looks like fun. Like he looks like he's just having fun telling jokes. And that's what originally got the wheels turning, because this was around the time when I was writing jokes, and I was just writing. I never thought of myself as like a stand-up, but I was just writing jokes. And that's when I started thinking like, man, maybe I could do something like that, because he made it look like it was so much fun. And Louis is just so funny.
He is, man. He's one of the best. And some of his appearances with like Patrice O'Neill on the Opie and Anthony show back in the day. Oh man,
Bill Burr. I would listen to hours of that.
Me too. I could throw it on YouTube anytime, fall asleep to it, wake up. Like, it's one of my go-tos is I'll just type in like Louis C.K. O-N-A, and I've listened to the same bits probably 1,000 times. But yeah, his stand-up's great. I didn't get too much into the actual Louis show, but I am familiar with it.
Yeah, it's a great show, man. And Louis just makes a lot of great content. He's got the show called Horace and Pete. That was excellent. It's very dark. So I just kind of warn you up front. Excellent show. And then Chappelle. I love Dave Chappelle.
Yeah, Dave Chappelle's one of the absolute goats. So the Chappelle Show was like
Yes.
that was like my all-time when I was young. I think I was in like grade 8 watching that, grade 7 or 8 or something watching. That was one of the all-time great shows. But you mentioned Chris Rock. So what do you think? I guess like this is a little side note, but what do you think of like his latest special? A lot of people kind of shit on it. They're like, oh, he flubbed up the last line and it was like a live performance though. I don't know. I loved it. I thought it was great and it was well needed. It's not his best special of all time, but I thought it was awesome. But a lot of people shit on it. What was your take on it?
I thought it was great. I mean, we do live in this era of like negativity where you can see people shitting on everything, but I thought he did a good job as a self-contained Chris Rock special. It was a very good special. I will say this, like I was let down by the special because the energy in the room, like part of being a comedian is reading the room, and nobody knows that better than Chris Rock. Like I'm not here to lecture him or give advice, but like the energy in the room everywhere Chris Rock went was Will Smith slapped the shit out of you and we all saw it. Yeah. And he refused to, like, when he was on tour, his ticket sales doubled because this happened. So these are people who want to come in there and yes, I understand Chris Rock's working on his new hour, but it's like, my guy, like you need to be riffing on Will Smith. You need to just be like, even if it's not going to be in your new hour, spend the first 10 minutes shitting on Will Smith, shitting on Jada. By the end of the tour, you probably have a great closing bit. But he refused to address that when he was on tour. The first thing he would even say is like, I'm not going to address the slap. And then he'd go into a stand-up. And it's like, this thing happened to you and you're pretending like it didn't, which would make it more awkward. And he did the same thing in his live special, which again, it's a live special. And this is how I feel about Cat Williams' live special. It's like you're on live Netflix because they're expecting you to shit on people. Like that's why they signed the deal. Cat Williams went viral for shitting on all these comedians. Netflix gives him a live stand-up deal. And I was like, oh man, I cannot wait to watch that. I wonder what he's going to say. If you thought Club Shay Shay was bad, I wonder what he's going to say about everybody else. And he did it. It was just like a Cat Williams special. Same with Chris Rock. So I think that hurt the special. And I think that's why so many people were frustrated because I really wanted it. Honestly, I wanted it to be like 60 minutes of him just shitting on Will Smith. I would have taken that, but he took the high road. I thought he told some great jokes. I just thought this special should have been the Will Smith special. It's just given what happened. This is one of the biggest moments ever in entertainment. And like the comedian, he didn't say anything in the moment at the Oscars. He didn't say anything on his special until the end. And I really thought he had a great opportunity to just create some awesome art.
Yeah, no, I agree with you a lot there. And yeah, you brought up Cat Williams, that woke folks special, man. That was shits, man. That was awful. And I love Cat Williams, dude, but I thought that was bad. Did you? Okay, we're just getting into comedy, but did you watch the Tom Brady roast on Netflix? Did you? Okay, so I watched the live version. I rewatched the edited version. I can confirm, like, what I noticed was edited was they just edited Kim's shit. They edited it down and then put like cheers in there where she was getting booed. So the live version is, I think, only like 3 minutes longer. That's all they edited on the edited version, in case anybody caught that or was curious. That was at least through my little analytical scope. Man, that roast I think was phenomenal, and I think it was much needed in the current climate of comedy where there's a billion podcasts that already talk about this, and we're going to get into wrestling. Don't worry, folks. But it's just with the whole, like, quote unquote, you want to call it cancel culture or whatever, just people getting in trouble, scared to talk about certain subjects, etc. And I just thought that roast was really well needed. It was timely. I thought everyone killed it. Like even like Julian Edelman fucking killed it, and then killed Tony Hinchcliffe. I call him Tony all the time. But Tony Hinchcliffe absolutely body bagged. Nikki Glaser, I'm not like the hugest fan, but she destroyed it too. Bert Kreischer, Tom Segura, they were a little cringe. But what were your thoughts, I guess, on the roast and just like who really stood out to you?
I mean, I loved it. I thought Tony Hinchcliffe was just a monster, and I'm friendly with Tony. I've he used to live here in LA before he went to Austin. I did kill Tony one time, and Bill Burr was on it.
Wow!
And like just to see him, he has been a great roaster for the longest time. I used to do roast battle at the belly room of the Comedy Store, and he was like a routine judge there at the roast battle. And just to see the way he did his roast is the opposite of Bert and Tom, because Bert and Tom get shit on a lot, but I think they're funny.
I think they're funny.
But they had this like prepared, and they even talked about it on their podcast in terms of Tom was like, when he kind of felt the energy of the room, he's like, we're going to bomb. Like, this is not like everybody's out here roasting and killing, and we're going to do this prepared kind of speech about Tom Brady that it just didn't click. And I just thought, at least Tom Segura, if you let him loose, he would have destroyed Tom Brady. But Tony Hinchcliffe did the opposite, where he's sitting at a table with Dana White, and you think that it's just like a cutaway, like a refresher. And then Tony just gets up from his seat and starts walking around, just roasting everybody one by one, like with this big dick energy. And it was just like, oh, not only was it cool to watch him do that with all that swagger, but the jokes he was telling were next level. There were silly jokes. There were puns. The all hell no.
All hell no's on the pussy. Oh
joke.
My God, dude.
It was just like a force of nature. And until, like, I agree with you about Nikki Glaser. Nikki Glaser just bodied everybody. It took a couple people to follow her. But when Tony Hinchcliffe did that, like, it was unbelievable. And I thought Andrew Schultz did a really good job. His writing is great, but he would have done much better in terms of response had he gone before Tony Hinchcliffe, because Tony Hinchcliffe just ended that.
Yeah, that was phenomenal. And the reason to circle it to wrestling, the reason I bring that up is because I think with the WWE Netflix deal and with The Rock being all involved, I think the next move is the roast of The Rock. I think that, right? Did I just come up with that shit right here? I think that's next up. You know what I mean? That's the move. I think it would draw a lot of attention. Who can follow Tom Brady and who's willing to take the piss? And I don't know, man. I think The Rock could do it. Man. Yeah, that's
I'd love that. And you know what? Like, I don't know if you get this, but like, I get these lines about certain things. Usually it's about wrestling lines, but I'm pretty friendly with the guy, this guy, Jimmy Shapiro. He sends out betting lines for the different pay-per-views for wrestling. And I cover it sometimes for Forbes, but he started to send me lines for other stuff that haven't been released yet. So right after the Tom Brady roast, he sent me lines for who's going to get roasted next, what celebrity. Right. And LeBron James is number one. Like, he's the audio favorite. But I believe The Rock was on that list too. And I don't think he was that low on the list. I think he was like in the top 5 or something like that. So you saying that, like, that could be the move. I would love to see that. Yeah. And it's funny you bring up, that's a great tie-in with WWE Netflix, because my next pro wrestling bit dropping tomorrow at 11 a.m. And if you see, it's about cancel culture. And you know, I go pretty far in the bit, and you know, I could just sense it's going to be one of those bits that causes a lot of consternation, even among my own audience.
I can't wait.
But it's about cancel culture, and I pretty much conclude, because of the Tiffany Stratton thing that happened, that caused a lot of conversation about cancel culture. But I really do feel that we've entered this new era of like the end of cancel culture. And I think that Netflix special was like, if we look back a year or two from now, and people are not getting canceled the way they were, and the way we're used to them getting canceled, we're going to look back at this Netflix special like this was the moment where everybody said, okay, fuck it. We're going to do a roast of Tom Brady. We're going to tell jokes about trans people, black people, gay people, everything. Nobody's off limits. From that point on, like, WWE's going to go into Netflix. They're not going to be TVPG. And I think we're going to get this new culture where it's like, we're over cancel culture, because that's inevitably going to happen. But I do think that the tipping point for that is going to be that roast of Tom Brady. And the roast of The Rock, my goodness.
Yeah,
like, I think The Rock is a great sport, and I think he'd be open to it. But I would love to see the roast of The Rock.
Yeah, I would too. And the culture behind the scenes. So I'm a script writer. I don't know if you knew that. Like, that's what I fucking do. Yeah. So behind the scenes of things, it's a lot less. It's more like back how it used to be. You know, I don't know how to word it. Yeah, it's less, people are less worried about, oh, we're going to get canceled and we have to, blah, blah, blah. I don't know. I feel like it is shifting, like you're saying. I agree with that fully. And I agree with that roast being, because like the last couple roasts before that were really kind of tame in comparison, I guess. So so I agree with that. But also, fuck you, Kim K, for editing that. We're getting that edited, motherfucker.
But yeah, I did not see it live, which I regret.
It wasn't any. The only difference was that Kim just really got booed. But then
I did see that.
What's great about her performance was she kind of won the crowd back by sticking to the prompter and just doing her goddamn thing. Yeah, that I think would have looked better for her than them just editing around and editing cheers in. I think that's just so, especially when we already know that you got booed. So I just think that was dumb on her part, but whatever, man. You know, women don't pay attention to that shit, and that's who pays attention to her. So